Welcome to the New Masculine Podcast. This is a place where masculine identifying people come together in community to disrupt outdated models of masculinity and together construct new models for our way forward as men. As a special note, while this conversation is between men, this podcast values all beings and seeks to create positive impacts for all. I'm your host, Travis Stock. I am a master life coach, an equus coach, which means I often partner with horses when supporting clients, and I'm a teacher. In my coaching work, I am passionate about the balance of masculine and feminine energies in each of us, regardless of gender. I seek to help others nurture a relationship with both types of energy, which often leads to a greater sense of wholeness. And yet what I found in my work with men is that many of us have been taught messages about what it means to be a man by first teaching us to avoid anything that is associated with the feminine. That avoidance leads to few experiences of intimacy, emotions outside of anger, vulnerability, or even a sense of belonging. Striving to comply with these models of masculinity has many of us feeling isolated, ashamed, unworthy, afraid, angry, and depressed. That's why I started this podcast, to bring men together who are ready for something new, something more whole. The field of coaching has gained a lot of popularity in the last decade, but the reality is many folks have been supporting others with a coaching style for 20, 30, or even more years. My next guest is one of those people. Ken Mossman is an executive and personal coach whose men's work helps others enhance their presence, focus, and leadership by developing their capacity to respond creatively to whatever is present in the moment. A significant portion of his work is helping men connect and communicate more powerfully with the people in their lives through developing and mastering their relationships to their emotions. When I found Ken in his work, I felt immediate desire to connect as our value systems feel so closely aligned. On top of his one-on-one coaching practice, Ken leads a men's program called The Integrated Man, hosts a podcast called Mojo for the Modern Man, and is also a senior faculty member of the Coactive Training Institute, which focuses on leadership training and coaching certifications. He personally identifies as a father, as a spiritual being, and as an artist. I'm really excited to learn from a fellow coach who has vast experience in helping men find balance between their masculine and feminine energies and live more whole lives. So let's welcome him into the New Masculine. Thanks for joining me, Ken.
Thanks for having me, Travis. It is a delight to be here with you.
The feeling is mutual. I assure you. I found in our previous conversations your energy to be so infectious, and really I can feel your passion for the work that you do, and I'm really excited to be able to share that with my audience, not just in our conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah. So is there any context we should know about you before we jump into the meat of our conversation? What else do we need to know?
What can I tell you? Well, I've been doing this work for really focusing on working primarily with men for the last 18 of the 20 and change years that I've been in the field of coaching. What else should I say by way of context? I'm in a 34-year relationship with my wife. My wife and I just celebrated the 34th anniversary of our first date.
Wow,
which is really fun.
Mm-hmm.
And we're the parents of as I say, 6 children who are all wrapped in one male body. So I have a 22-year-old son who's a glorious, adventurous spirit. And from a contextual standpoint, I think that's a good place to start.
Yeah. Well, the 18 years of working with men, focusing in that area is really why I wanted to bring you in, because as a fellow coach, I've been coaching since about 2012, and I'm just in the last year and a half really focusing my business on men masculinity. And so I really like bringing in sort of what I would call the elders, the people that have been doing this work for a while, because there's so much experience to learn from, and there's so much trial and error that's already been done that I'd love to learn from, and I'd love for the listeners to learn from as well.
Yeah, that's great. And I kind of chuckle at the notion of eldership, because there's, on the one hand, there's a part of that that's really true. I've been doing this work for a while. And there's also, the thing that has me chuckle is like, oh, wow, have I been doing it for that long? When am I going to figure it out?
But I think that that's the thing is that I love to model on this podcast is that we don't all have it all figured out. Even those of us that have resources and tools and skill sets around coaching and talk about this, we're not imperfect beings that are constantly learning as well.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think particularly as men, there's this notion that in some way, shape, or form, we have it figured out, that we have the answers is I find it fascinating.
Yeah, totally. So let's find out more about your relationship specifically to masculinity. What are the stories that come up for you when you think about what you learned growing up in this culture about what it means to be a man?
So I grew up I was born in 1958. And when I look at my relationship with masculinity, it's important to note that I and, men of my generation grew up during the peak, early peak of the women's movement of the 60s and 70s. And there was something for me about growing up I'm going to say in the shadow of women's movement. There were many shadows that I felt like I grew up in. It's not to say I had a great childhood, by the way. And at the same time, there was the shadow of Vietnam, the shadow of Watergate, for my generation, the shadow of the women's movement. And as a fairly sensitive kid, which I absolutely was, I was a fairly sensitive kid. There was on the one hand this message that said, "Oh, the women out there have been kind of given a raw deal," and it wasn't that in some way, shape, or form I was personally responsible for women getting a raw deal. I knew that the scales were tilted. I knew that the scales were tilted. That was really, really apparent. And in a way that favored or privileged, in the language of the day, that privileged those of us who walked around in a male skin. So in many ways, I found myself turning down the expression of the full range of my masculinity. No, I was as an athlete, for instance. There was just definitely this aggressive side that I carried, but off of the playing field, off of the ski hill, my sport was mostly downhill skiing. I put that to the side in many ways because I saw the boys around me at that time who carried that, often carrying it in unhealthy ways. I saw them as bullies. And to a degree, I shut down that part of myself. And I don't think I shut it down in some fairly unconscious ways. And I don't know that there was ever a danger that I would become, quote unquote, a bully. As I look back, the chances of that happening were slim to none. But I kind of threw out, half of the baby with the bathwater and modeled myself in many ways as the quote unquote sensitive new age guy. Which I got to tell you wasn't a good look.
Tell me why.
I think because it wasn't the whole story. It really wasn't the whole story. And it's funny because, of course, I was a sensitive kid. I'm a sensitive man. And at the same time, it wasn't the whole story. It was really, really limiting in terms of my expressiveness. And that's I think the biggest piece. I mean, there were things that I was uncomfortable expressing. And it's hard to name exactly what those were, But I knew, for instance, and I'll talk about skiing for a moment as a model. I knew, for instance, that there was a way that I showed up on a hill. There was a way that I showed up when I had skis and boots on. That I remember thinking at one point, I was in relationship with this woman. I was in my mid-20s. Actually, there were a few relationships in there, and my thought was always, oh, I wish she could see me ski. I wish she could see me ski. This thought that, boy, if you only saw me ski, you'd know you'd know the real me. And it's a metaphor. I think it's a metaphor for the pieces of myself that I didn't allow into my interpersonal relationships, not just with women, by the way, but across the board.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that, because I think that's something that I personally relate to is it's very obvious to see the shadow sides of masculinity that are the big, boisterous, overpowering, dominating, aggressive styles. It's easy to see those shadows because they're so kind of obvious and big.
Yeah.
But there's the other side of the same coin, which is that sort of meek, spiritual, enlightened man that isn't connected to his wholeness, to his authenticity, that is just as much in shadow. And that's the kind of man I am, that I have a similar experiences of recognizing, like, I don't like the way that men hold anger and use anger. And so for much of my teens and 20s, I cut myself off from anger. It definitely found its ways to seep out. And it led me to feeling really depressed. It led me to feeling like I didn't have my own sense of agency, identity, truth, boundaries. I was just kind of at the whim to life. I was a passenger. And so I can really resonate with that piece of, if you don't own the wholeness of who you are and you just sort of section yourself off into this spiritual new age man, it isn't a really good look in the long run. It might work for a little while, but it doesn't work long time. It's going to need some updating.
Yeah, and I like that because I had said a sensitive new age guy, and you threw in the spiritual new age guy, and I love that you're bringing that into the picture, because I think in many ways, there's oh my God, stories we could tell, and do sometimes. If we bring spirituality into the picture, even the notion that I could occupy a quote unquote spiritual space, is it entirely true that by voting voting a big chunk of myself off of my own island, that I wasn't able to access a spiritual portal? Say that's the language for it. That's not exactly quite accurate, but that'll work for the moment. No, I'd argue no on the one hand. On the other hand, because as I look at my own models of spirituality, they are about wholeness, and they are about inclusion, and they are about recognizing that, sometimes the way in is through those very shadows that I've pushed off to the side. I think of, moments of experiencing deep spiritual connections, like, the clouds parted and the angels sang. And one of them was a connection to deep loss and grieving. Another of them that comes to mind was when I actually allowed myself to make friends with rage. And that doesn't mean that I was out, destroying things. It means that I actually allowed myself to sit with this deep well of anger and rage, and give voice to it and give movement to it, and simply allow it to be, in a way that was with harm to none, including, by the way, with harm to myself. So there was none of that. And yet this, I walked out of it with, I felt like I walked out of it with, oh, have you met my new friend, Rage? Let me introduce you.
I had such a similar experience of connecting with my own rage and it feeling very empowering and being like, ooh, where has this been the whole time? And not rage in the... I mean, so often we're only modeled the versions of anger and rage that are destructive.
Correct.
But there are constructive forms of it. It can be the birthplace of passion. It can be a really clear and insightful and incisive tool when channeled and used, and a relationship is developed to it. Actually, I'm laughing because it's sitting in the room with me is a wooden mask that's carved into a lion's face that a friend made for me as a sort of totem to the moment I connected with my rage. A moment of reminding me of the power of it and what it would do for my life forward. And it did. It was the thing that got me out of depression finally, was when I finally connected to my rage and started developing a relationship to it.
Yeah, the imagery of that, Travis, is beautiful. It's just beautiful.
Well, I heard you say that so much of your spirituality now includes wholeness and inclusion, and those are doorways into the things that are in shadow, or the things that are doorways into more spirituality for you. What was that journey like to move from that new agey kind of guy that was not a good look into the man that you are now?
I woke up one morning, snapped my fingers, had a cup of coffee, and it was done.
Right.
Yeah. Now, if you want to hear the real story.
No, I'd rather you teach me the one-step method.
Yeah. Let me show you. Let me share with you the spiritual bypass. Yes, it's all the rage. So it was a long haul. I mean, I'd be lying if I said otherwise. And by the way, I don't want to even begin to give the illusion that that I think I've arrived, because oh my God, that and $2.50 will get you on the subway. Yeah, exactly. And so it was a long journey, and it absolutely continues to this day. And I think it began. Actually, I know it began at a really young age. Probably, again, if I really look at the journey as a whole, I can see the roots of it so clearly in my childhood, and specifically through moments of both connection and separation. And when I say that, the first memory I have is somewhere around the age of 3-ish. And I remember my mother was pregnant with my younger sister. I have this vivid memory of a sunlit morning on the patio of our home on Devonshire Road in Cedar Grove, New Jersey. 69 Devonshire Road on Cedar Grove, New Jersey. And
nice
reaching
memory.
Up, yeah, and reaching up and putting my hand on her belly. And that was a moment of connection. It was kind of this moment of all is right with the world, and there's this thing happening that, of course, I didn't really understand. But then, there's that, and then there's moments of, like that were much tougher, like being told on the first day of first grade that I had to stay after because I wasn't taking things seriously enough, and also being told by that teacher that I, with my smile and thinking everything was funny, I would never make it in the world. That's kind of hard for a 6-year-old to hear.
Wow.
And yeah, I'm okay, thank you. But there's a way of like, oh, okay, then I guess I don't get to be that.
Yeah.
Like I can't be that in the world. And other moments of, like, a lot of the moments from then on are, again, moments of deep connection with close friends who got me, for the first romantic relationship as having a role in that, even though I was playing this role, as a 14, 15-year-old high school kid, as a sensitive new age man, there was a deep relationship there. By the way, I'm still friendly with, consider this this first love of my life. We're still tight friends. and which I think speaks to the nature of this view toward wholeness. Like, oh, I don't have to be separate from you. There are many more stories I could tell. But it was it's been this journey over the from that first moment of awareness at age 3 till now, this 60-year journey of continuing to look at first, what are the pieces of myself that I separated from, and then, because the journey has been not only the journey of separating from those pieces, but then consciously reaching out and finding those pieces of self that I separated from and bringing them home and reintegrating them and letting them know that, no, we've bought the place. You always have a home inside here. The lease isn't going to run out. You're not going to be evicted again.
Mm. There's such an important element of internal safety that you're creating, and psychological safety and emotional safety in those moments to bring those pieces back into integration, the parts that have been pushed out.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think many men are taught how to create safety in those kinds of ways. We know how to be aggressive to create safety, or dominating to create immediate safety in dangerous moments, but that sort of creation of safe internal space for those pieces that you cast out for a reason, for them to find home again and to come back into alignment and integration. How did you create that kind of safety?
I had some great mentors and went through some amazing programs from the work that I did over the course of, including my training, including my training as a coach through what was then the Coaches Training Institute, what's now the Coactive Training Institute, through the work of Awakened Wisdom and being on a vision quest, through including the work that I've done with lucid living and coaching transformation over the course of the last 15, 16 years. And being in relationship with my wife, being in relationship in general. I mean, the teacher that my son has been, it's interesting as I look, going to art school, learning to take ownership of my work and identifying as a creator without identifying as the piece of as the pot itself on the wheel, or the piece of art that hung on the wall, but yet knowing that there's this intimate relationship here. Learning to, I owned a guitar when I was 19. I really dug into starting to learn to play, really recognizing the musician that lived in me when I was 49. So yeah, there's more and more. I mean, being out in the woods or out in the backcountry, sleeping under the stars, a trip on the Colorado River, and years spent on, going back to the skiing, years spent in community, doing the crazy things that we would do on skis. All of those pieces, add up, and they all represent different important aspects of who I am now. Mm-hmm. And they each live in their time. This is the fascinating thing. They each continue to live in their time and live in their reality, in their space, and they're all a part of me. So both those things, feel true. I know that was a lot.
No, I think it's really helpful. I really enjoy the way you talk about it. It sounds to me like you allow yourself to be a student of life, that everything you engage with has the opportunity, and you're open to the idea that it can help develop something within you.
Yeah, that's funny that you mentioned that, Travis, because I just wrote an article about that, stepping outside of one's comfort zone, because almost everything that I just laid out there, each one of those represents a step outside of my own comfort zone, and finding more and more of myself, finding more and more of the world, finding more and more connection in all of those things. It's cool. Yeah, it's cool. Thanks.
Yeah, it's cool to reflect on it, I bet. And I think it's something I want to like kind of really highlight, because as men we can often be trained to look at problems and then find solutions. Problem, solution, problem, solution. And I think our world feels really hard at times right now, dealing with a global pandemic, a political system that is wild and crazy and nonsense at sometimes, and really having a racial reckoning in our culture right now. Like there's a lot of really intense shadow stuff, and we're kind of currently distracted from it, but we just were in the really strong moments of recognizing the Me Too generation. It's like we've got all these shadows that are coming to light, and it can be really easy for us as men to be like, well, we need the solution, just find the easy solution. And yet the style that you're kind of talking about and modeling has a much more feminine approach to it, which isn't about finding a solution. It's about helping develop something within you, developing more of yourself, developing more awareness and relationship to all the parts of you. That I think is something that I want to encourage more men to really start to play with, is this development-oriented approach to life rather than this solution-oriented. Solutions are important at times, but there is this developmental piece that you kind of model in your storytelling about letting life develop and grow things within you, not just, I have a new skill to make money with.
Yeah, that's interesting. I don't know that I would refer to it as necessarily quote unquote feminine, because I think that and we could go back and forth on this, but the version of the masculine, in quotes, the masculine that most of us have been raised on is extraordinarily distorted. And that notion that every circumstance is a nail. We just need to find the hammer. Every problem is something that needs us to solve it. That sort of absolute simplistic approach. I think I see that as living in the land of the quote unquote distorted masculine, and as I look at, my work is all about wholeness and inclusion. Wholeness and inclusion, all parts of oneself, including the shadows, getting to know all those pieces. It's interesting because on the one hand, it's, there are absolutely parts of that, of course, include bringing home what might be considered more quote unquote feminine, but they also include bringing home those parts that could be considered deeply masculine. I know there's a lot more conversation to be had around that. So I'm on the one hand, I'm agreeing with you, and on the other hand, I'm saying there's a much bigger picture to the masculine than the culture allows itself to see. And I'll give you an example. I want to go back to the rage piece, because even though I was by myself doing that work, there were friends of mine who were leading this program, mentors of mine, who were in a room getting ready for the work of the day while I was out in this courtyard having this rage moment. And when I came in, and I went and had breakfast, and then when I came into the room, they approached me and said, "Wow, that was I think that was one of the most beautiful things I have ever seen." And that speaks to this rawness of emotion, this receiving of this almost, that could be perceived as quote unquote feminine, but was expressed in a way that I would assert was, beautifully masculine. There's something about the word and the polarities of the two that often don't do justice to the whole.
I fully agree with you, and it's a thing that I'm really wrestling with in the way that I present my work, is because I belong as a gay man. I belong to a community that's sort of deconstructing the gender binary, and I really value that, and I think it's really important, and I want to support that. And yet, a lot of my conversations, a lot of my work has very binary type language that has a connotation to it that brings people into polarity. And yet the way I hold it is much more of a spectrum, and then giving, as I was saying in the intro about your version of work, is like giving people access to whatever they need to respond to the moment and whatever's present in that moment. You might need a little bit more feminine in this moment. You might need a little more masculine. That fluid being able to flow between and choose where you sort of land in the spectrum is kind of where I hold it. But I think it is confusing and sometimes isn't capturing the full message because it's using language that really puts us into that binary kind of thinking.
Yeah, I would agree.
So what are some of the other things that you think our society doesn't make space for that are really important in terms of the masculine?
We don't do a great job of making room for not knowing. That's a big one. That's a big one. We don't make a lot of room for, as I'm describing all these different aspects of my own self and my own story, I talk a lot about complexity in my work, and we don't make a lot of room for complexity. We don't have a great understanding of it, and or an appreciation for our eyes to see the beauty of complexity. And it's one of the things that makes the natural world so compelling, by the way. Everyone can appreciate a gorgeous sunset, but when they really look, I think if we really stop and look at, wow, what is it that has this be so beautiful? There's all of these systems conspiring to create the visual that is the beautiful sunset. So, in our rush to be the solution to every problem, we tend to fall into right and wrong, dogmatic. Again, we fall into these binaries. So there needs to be more room for questions, curiosity, for not knowing, for the courage it takes to not know. I'm going to throw that in because that, oftentimes not knowing is the most courageous thing someone can say. I don't know. Wow. You admit that? Well, yeah, because I don't know. I could lie to you. So there's more, but space, the space to not know, space to not have to figure it out, to make room to be more alive. I'm going to say also to make room to be more alive, not only in the questions, but to let ourselves be more alive, to come back home to our physical selves, to live in our bodies and not spend so much time, focusing on the life of the mind, because this is only part of the story. This is only part of the story. To make more room for and to bust the paradigm that says that that attributes, for instance, intuition. Yeah, that attributes intuition. It's like, oh, it's your feminine intuition. It's like, no, that's your human intuition. We all have intuition. So to make room for more of those things as men.
I really appreciate what you're bringing because I want to know what are the pieces we're not making space for. So that's why I'm doing this podcast, is how do we continue making more space for us to be more whole?
Yeah, and make space. For goodness sake, if you're in a relationship, make space to listen.
So true.
And not to listen for what's the solution. Just listen. Make space for vulnerability. Not that's not, and to not conflate vulnerability with weakness. Vulnerability is is a key component in my world anyway. It's a key component to powerful leadership.
Right.
Transparency, vulnerability, all those pieces.
Well, that's what I really liked about when I made the transition out of social work into coaching, that it felt like as a coach, I had more freedom to be vulnerable with my clients, to really show up in that space with them than I did as a social worker who was investigating abuse and neglect with children. Like, that's not a space to be vulnerable.
No, my goodness, no.
And so when this coaching mindset has really allowed me that space to really be of service, but also to be vulnerable with people, to be a real human. And it's something I actually really value about the way I hear you talking is you keep making space for the reality that you don't have it all figured out. Even with your awareness, even with life's journey, even though you have amazing stories and storytelling capabilities, that you still don't have it figured out and you're still in process like the rest of us. Because I think there are, at least it's been my experience in the self-helpy kind of world, there's a lot of false prophets out there. There's a lot of selling something that isn't quite fully integrated as a being themselves. And I think it's a disservice to keep putting people on a pedestal that they've got it and they know it. And then the client is always kind of reaching for this imaginary thing. And then basically just in the gap between that, feeling a lot of shame about how they can't get there.
Yeah, as you're saying that, Travis, I'm thinking, the only, I'm 5'7.5" on a good day, so I'm thinking like the only pedestal I want to be on is the one that allows me to take the thing off of the top shelf. Like, put me on that one and then get me down,
Oh, that's fantastic. I think it's something I wanted to talk a little bit more about was you said something about how we need to make more space to be in our bodies. That feels really true to me. How often we're living from the level of the mind and up from the neck up. I think it feels really true to me that we have to develop new relationships to being in our bodies and not just like, oh, I go to the gym and lift weights kind of being in your body, but actually...
Which there's nothing wrong with, by the way.
But no, I work out 5 times a week. My partner's a CrossFit instructor. Like we know what physical exercise does. And in many ways, my physical exercise journey was a way of me connecting to some rage and some anger. Yeah. That I wanted to channel in a different way. And so how do you recommend men really getting into their bodies and dropping out of their head?
Yeah, it's going to sound elemental because it is. And it's really, really important. A great place to start is to begin to become aware of physical sensation. Now that might sound kind of goofy or crazy. And having done, again, all of these years of emotional education, working on emotional literacy, emotional flexibility, emotional fluency, half of the component of emotion is sensation. It's literally, so how do you feel? It's the literal piece of feeling. So it starts with really becoming aware again of physical sensation. If you're holding a pen while you're writing, what do you notice about having the pen between your fingers? There is sensation there that we don't pay enough attention to, but these are, again, I use the word gateways a lot or portals. This is a portal. This is a way in. If I'm spending all day sitting in a chair, am I intimately familiar with the sensation of, lowering my backside into the chair? And what does it feel like? What's that? What's the sensation? What am I noticing? What do I notice about what the air temperature or the sensation as I'm walking, or even I know you can't see this as you're listening, but I'm waving my hand to the side, and as I wave my hand, I can feel the cool sensation on the backside of my hand and the warmth of my palm at the same time. And it doesn't have to be a big deal. If you've been sitting for a while, back to the sitting, if you've been sitting for a while, as you stand up, notice the sensation of your weight building on the bottoms of your feet. All of these little cues that begin to remind us that, this is, this skin covered home that we live in, has the capacity to feel so much, to really feel just so much. And I gave the example of the hand before and the pen. At the same time, once you notice what the pen feels like in your hand, notice the sound it makes. That's part of our physical experience too. I think for men, not all the time, but oftentimes, the only time we really allow ourselves to feel, to focus on physical sensation is when we're eating and when we're having sex.
Yeah, I was going to say sex must be the other one.
Yeah. And oftentimes there's a whole, even in the context of sexual experience, there's this entire realm of sensation that, lives outside of a genital focus.
Right.
Say. Now, this whole realm, it's just like, oh my God.
Well, it reminds me of what you were saying about what our culture doesn't make space for in masculinity. And you were saying something about like make time and space to listen. It's like almost like make time and space to feel, being really present. We're so busy. We're so distractible. We've got our devices. We've got everything that keeps us sort of distracted and disconnected from the way it feels inside of our body. And it does require making some time and space to be present with what we feel, to feel the pen in the hand, to feel a breeze blowing by your hair, to really anchor into the senses, to smell things, to hear things, like to taste the nuances of things. I think it does require intentionally creating some time and space for that.
It definitely requires an intentionality. Yeah. All these things are practices, and again, they needn't be difficult. For instance, because so many of us spend time on our devices. It's like when you pick up the device, just notice, oh, okay, this thing has some heft in it. It weighs something. How often do I just let myself experience what it feels like, and what's the difference between the texture of the case that my phone is in and the glass on the front if you're working with a smartphone. As I'm tapping away on my computer keys, what are my fingertips feeling, and what is the sound they're making? It's all right there. So we can multitask a little bit with these things at the same time. It's not like we have to just again, it's in the spirit of inclusion and wholeness. It's like, oh, this is here too. Oh, wow. Who knew I could feel my fingers while I type?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you're saying we don't have to be a monk in a monastery. We can actually live our normal lives and still do.
No, you definitely want to be a monk in a monastery. Yeah.
Well, one of my favorite ways that I help encourage men to get in their bodies is through the horse work that I do. There's something about being in the presence of such a big body, something about the intertwining of our nervous systems that happens in that space. The amount of presence that's required for a lot of people that are unfamiliar with horses about how to keep themselves safe. I have a lot of conversations with my clients when engaging with a horse where their body is responding in one way. The horse is checking them out and sniffing them, and their whole body is tense and is leaning away from the horse, and like their eyes even get a little bit bigger. And I ask them, how does this feel? And they go, oh, I like it. It's fine. It's like their speech and what they're saying is completely opposite of what the body's doing. And just being able to point that out and go like, look at your body. Where is it leaning? Where's their weight at? Where's your muscle tension? When they start to go, oh, well, what's that about? The body has information for us. It's telling us things that we need to pay attention to and that we want to pay attention to. And so I very much agree with you that getting into the body and out of the mind is such a powerful way of creating wholeness and learning more about ourselves.
Yeah, I love that you pointed that. I love the story about the client with the horse. And the temptation can be, again, because we like things to be black and white. We like to They like to divide things up into camps, this good, that bad. The 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 point I want to make is, we don't want to throw the cognitive mind away. The cognitive mind is just miraculous. It's amazing.
Totally.
And it ain't the whole story. These one of my clients refers to academics sometimes as considering academics are people who are pretty much convinced that the body is just the sticks that carry the mind around. It's like minds on sticks, and to include that, when what do we know from a neuroscience standpoint at this stage of the game? And I'm not an expert on neuroscience, but I do know we have 3 neural centers. We have the one in our brain, the one that gets edumacated out there in the world. And then we have this sophisticated neural net around the heart. And we have a sophisticated neural net that's associated with the gut. So there's a lot more to our neural network than just what's between our ears. And moving into the body to begin to, I love that you said there's information there. It's like, this is all beautiful information. Brings us back to complexity, of course. But it's, there's just so many ways of getting information about and experiencing life in our world. And it's easy to miss if we limit ourselves to what's, from the jaw up.
Yeah. I'm glad you pointed that out, because you were talking about intuition earlier, and there's a reason why we call intuition like a gut feeling. It's in the body. It's not in the mind itself. It's not in thought. It's in that sort of like perception that the animal being that is in our bodies houses. It can pull in a lot more information than our prefrontal cortex and the logical sides of our mind.
Yep. Yeah. Beautiful.
So I know for me, there was an important reason why I started sort of moving my business in the direction of working with men and masculinity, sort of focusing in that place. It was just as much about the change I wanted to see in the world as it was about my own healing journey, stepping forward into my own healing around where my wounds around masculinity are.
Mm-hmm.
As a gay man growing up in this world. Do you have a clear idea of what led you to start moving your business in that direction 18 years ago?
Yeah, absolutely. I noticed that it's going to sound so funny, and at the same time it's true. It's as I kept looking at, well, what really fascinates me? Who are the people who really fascinate me? I kept coming back with the dude I was looking at in the mirror. And I mean that, it's like, whoa, who's the most fascinating person in your world? Well, it's you. It's you. And finally I because I felt like I was, I kept going, and I was like, no, it can't be that. It can't be that. So I kept looking outside. No, it can't be, it's like, and then finally what I noticed is things started getting a whole lot easier when I allowed the people I was most interested in and really had the passion to work with, when I allowed them to be, that version, when in many ways, when I allowed myself to become the avatar for the work that I wanted to do in the world, because I knew, there's more to the story, of course, because I knew I wasn't the only one who was having the experiences that I was having, who was, wondering where the fun went, who was, and I remember as clear as day, this is a story I've told many, many times. I remember driving down, I was driving west on Route 537 in Freehold, New Jersey, when I still lived in Howell, New Jersey at the time. My son was about 2.5 years old, and maybe even 2. And I was driving home after a day of working with personal fitness training clients. And, I knew that I was on the verge of burnout, and I was driving home, and I remember clear as day, I could describe to you the angle of the light. I could describe to you, like, it was autumn. So I could, the color on the trees and exactly where I was, to my left was Colts Neck High School. And this message that came in clear as day that said, if you don't change what you're doing and where you live, you're going to be dead in 5 years.
That's clear.
It was crystal clear. I went home and it was shocking, Travis. It was absolutely shocking. And I went home and I shared this with my wife, and she, being the deeply caring and understanding woman that she is, she looked me in the eye and she said, "You manipulative bastard. Is this what it's going to take for us to move? All right, then." Different perspectives is what it takes. And at the same time, I know she felt, she could feel the gravitas and the truth of it, because I was like, geez, I don't know what just happened, but I don't think I can't say that was hitting bottom for me, and it was a warning. I had enough smarts to pay attention at that moment, because I'd had other, in the year leading up to that, now I'm a personal fitness trainer. I was a healthy guy. I'd been rear-ended at a stoplight in a hit and run. Go figure that one out. I had strep throat and then pneumonia. So talk about the body talking to you. I had a fight with the local park service. Who has fights with the local park service? That's crazy. Like, all of these things had happened, and then that happened. It was like, okay, I don't need any more 2x4s across the forehead. Thank you very much. I am now listening. And I've talked to a number of men, in my own podcast, and certainly with clients who had, their version of that similar experience of finally saying, oh, okay, I'm going to listen. And that is really what, I think in many ways, like, that led me to the men that I want to work with. Because I had, what's true, great wife, beautiful son, great home, loved where we lived, just didn't like where it was in terms of what was happening in that area of central New Jersey at the time. I knew there were things that I had left behind that I dearly missed. And I really was. I was burning out. So that, that became, that when I let myself really look there, it's like, oh, like, that guy, if he had first, well, I had to go through, we all have to go through what we have to go through in order to find our path. That I don't want to shortchange that, because actually I'm so thankful that I had experienced that pivotal moment, because it led me where I am now. But that's the guy I want to work with. I want to work with the guy who's like that. Those are the men, the ones who have had they don't need to take another 2x4 across the forehead. They've taken one or more already, and they can see that, it's time to move in a different direction.
I'm so glad there's men like you that are out there supporting men who have taken some 2x4s to the face.
Yeah,
because they're part of one of the unspoken rules, and sometimes the spoken rules, of being a man in this culture, is that we have to man up, or we have to continue to endure, and that we have to push through those things as a representation or an exemplification of our masculinity. And so I love that you're creating space for men to say, I've had enough of that. I've had enough of being man enough and enduring. I'm ready to listen.
Yeah. And having been there, done that, bought the t-shirt. Yeah. For sure. Yeah. Yeah.
So tell me more about the men's work you're leading. What should people know about it? What is it? How does it show up, or what's its form?
Beautiful. So if I look at the work that I do as a crown, well, obviously there's the coaching piece, the one-on-one piece, which is amazing, just fantastic work that I'm privileged enough to get to do. And the jewel in the crown of all of the different work that I do is the program that you mentioned at the top of our conversation, which is the Integrated Adult Man program, which has now been shortened to IAM because it's easier to say and no one really knows what an integrated adult man is anyway. Well, I do now.
Yeah. We don't have very many models of those. So
yeah, we don't now. Exactly.
That?
Yeah, we don't have many models. Well, in a nutshell, it is, finding those parts of, it's finding the parts of ourselves that we voted off our own island and, bringing them back and making peace with them, being in conversation with them, and being in conscious relation with them again, so they know that they have a home. So it's, finding that little boy who was all about wonder and fun and discovery through play, and bringing him back home. It's finding that inner adolescent and, making peace with him and his rebelliousness and his abundant creativity and idealism, and his rebelliousness, by the way, too, and letting him know that he has a home here. It's finding that, that the ideologue of the young adult in us who, saw the world as his oyster, but was terrified to choose a path.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because that cut off some of the possibility, and it's all about possibility. It's fine. It's finding the shadows in us, the everything from the killer on up and down the line, bringing home those shadows and, giving time and attention to the wounded and broken parts and bringing them home as well, and letting them know that they're safe here, that they are safe and loved without condition, by the way, that they are safe and loved without condition, and that they get to, they get to come home. They have a place.
So you would say that a good portion of the work you do is shadow work, is working with the shadow and bringing it into integration?
I would refer to it as parts work, and yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
How
for sure.
Does it differ in terms of like the Jungian kind of psychology work of shadow work, or is it similar in that sense?
I would say it's aligned.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would say it's aligned. I'm not a Jungian, so I can't say, oh yeah, and I can't say, gosh, no, but I'm pretty sure from what Jungians who have experienced my work say, oh, that's kind of like humana humana. It's like, oh, cool.
Cool. There's a way that I frame what I say my coaching is about, that I'm wondering I'm going to share it with you and see if it feels aligned with what you're talking about, or if you would agree with it. That I really think coaching is a process of unlearning. It's not about learning new skills for how to be better at things. It's actually a process of unlearning. It's a returning to innocence. It's returning to the being we were when we came into this world, before we learned what we needed to do in order to fit in, belong, receive love, or it was beaten into us what we needed to push away in order to belong and receive love in our culture.
I think that's a huge piece of it. Yeah, I think that's it. I would agree that's a huge piece of it for sure. Unlearning, deconstructing message. That's one of the things that I talk about a lot, particularly in the IAM program, is looking at the messaging and deprogramming that messaging. You mentioned man up before. So yeah, unlearning, deprogramming, deconstructing, however you want to word it, I think it all lives in the same neighborhood, even if it doesn't all have the same address.
Mm-hmm. That's such an important art form, almost, the deconstruction process, that we don't really give people the tools and skills to do so. Like even just in a capitalist society, we are very much about more and adding on, and always about addition rather than subtraction. And so I think that's something that we as coaches can really support and hold space for, is that deconstruction process, where you find the limitations of coping strategies, of wounded parts of you, the parts of you that have been driving the bus for a while. You find the limitations of those and you learn how to deconstruct them so that then you can reconstruct something that's more whole and that's more authentic and more truthful.
Yeah, there's an awful lot of houses of cards that get knocked down. Thank goodness, knocked down in the process. I want to include ourselves in it, because we get, I'd be lying if I didn't say I get as much out of the work as my clients, and I'm sure that's true for you as well.
For sure.
Yeah, for sure. But there's something fantastic about saying, oh, see that house of cards over there, and it's like, oh, or a client coming and say, hey, I discovered this house of cards. It's like, great, let's pull out the bottom one and see what happens. So for the purpose of, I don't want to be cavalier about it, because it's all conscious. It's all done with awareness, hopefully. And then we get to, so now that house of cards is off of the property, now we can dig a sound foundation and put some real, this becomes something that we can build on bedrock instead of on cardboard.
Yeah, or a foundation that's completely cracked and leaking water and
right.
Yeah, totally.
Yep.
Well, I had the pleasure of speaking with somebody that's been through your IM program recently, and he had nothing but rave reviews to say about the work you're doing. And so I've heard such great things about what you're doing and how you're supporting men.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So if there was one piece of advice that you'd like to leave the listeners of this podcast with, one thing you think men should know, what would that be?
So the first one comes back to listen. Not for the sake of fixing, not for the sake of figuring out. Just learn to listen to your partner, your wife, your children. Listen. And the second one would be, oh my goodness, and I think these kind of stand on equal footing. The second one would be, no man does it himself. Even the lone cowboy had his horse. Learn to ask for help and know that doing so is not a sign of weakness or less thanness, that more often it's a sign of courage and ownership. So listen and learn to ask for help.
Thank you for including that second one, because I think that's something that I'm still deprogramming in myself around masculinity, is especially as a business owner, that I have to do it all alone, that I have to know how to run a business and be a life coach, and I have to, I can get really tied up in some of those things. And so it is helpful to be reminded that no man does it alone. And to cave early, ask for help early. You'll save yourself a lot of heartache.
Yeah, don't wait.
So if people want to find out more about you, your podcast, your IM program, how might they do so?
So best place is my website, which is Cirrus, as in the cloud. And I know you're putting this in the program notes, so I don't know that I need to spell it out unless you tell me to spell it out. So cirrusleadership.com. And there's links there on the classes page of my website, where you can find out more about the IM program. I run it twice a year, usually in the spring and the fall. And my podcast is Mojo for the Modern Man, and that is available on Google Podcasts and Buzzsprout. It's hosted on Buzzsprout, and you can find that through my website as well. It's on Apple Podcasts, and it's on all the podcasts, big podcast directories. And feel free to reach out to me. My easiest place to do that is through links on the website. You can find me on LinkedIn, and you can find me on Facebook. as well.
Two things I want to pull you out on. Your podcast, what is the focus of it? Like, what are people going to be tuning in? What are they going to get out of it?
Yeah, well, on a future episode, Travis Stock will be appearing, so you don't want to miss that.
Damn straight.
Yeah. So it's conversations. It's really conversations about the experience of living in a male body at the crossroads of vulnerability, responsibility, oftentimes crisis because of the times we're living in, and creativity, and we always start out with each man telling his story. So it's stories of moving about the world in the skin of a man.
Great. Well, I'm looking forward to it.
Likewise.
I'm looking forward to that conversation. And the second thing was, you said that for your IM program, you usually run it in the spring and the fall. Does that mean you have an upcoming one coming soon?
I do indeed. I have one that goes live. On the first class is on the 16th of March, and I don't have the September dates yet, but I will have the September dates sometime in the coming month or two.
Oh, well, that's right around when we should be hearing from you when this podcast episode is released. So hopefully we can get it in time to help people hear about it.
Beautiful. Thank you. Much appreciated.
Yeah, of course. Well, it's been such a pleasure to have you on this conversation. I am just so nourished, and it just feels so great to be in collaboration with other men that have been doing this work, that are continuing to do the work, that are imperfect, that are still figuring it out. It just feels so good because the boy in me that picked up a lot of shame can always feel like I'm always behind or I'm always not doing enough. And you've just created so much space for the journey to be what it is and it to be continually unfolding. So thank you for joining me and thanks for opening that space.
Thank you so much, Travis. This has been an absolute delight.
If people want to connect with me, you can go to my website at travisstock.com. You can find me on Instagram at Travers03. It's a little bit of my personal life, but also a lot of posting about the new masculine there. You can email me directly at travisstock03@gmail.com. If you're interested in mentorship or working around masculinity, men stuff, please do reach out. That's some of my favorite work to be doing. So if you're one of those men that's out there that's really trying to do some of this work, please do reach out. And if you're interested in supporting the mission of this podcast, I'm on Patreon. You can go to patreon.com/thenewmasculine to become a contributor and support the mission of this podcast.